annual budget letter I will reference, and then Ms. Jennings and I will lead the presentation from the podium. So if there's no questions, I shall begin. Dear Mr. President and members of Council, as required by Title IX of the Delaware Code, I respectfully submit the proposed annual operating budget for Sussex County for fiscal year 2024. The FY24 proposed budget was developed by the County Administrator, the Finance Director, COO, Deputy Finance Director, and Manager of Accounting. This recommended budget was drafted after receiving numerous submissions from county departments. We greatly appreciate the efforts of the directors and their staff in assisting us in producing a balanced budget, many of whom have joined us today in chambers or watching online. Like so many organizations in today's economy, Sussex County is attempting to navigate through an uncertain financial environment as the economy continues to decelerate. The two driving factors influencing the county's budget are the increases in cost due to inflation and decreases in revenue due to higher interest rates. As such, we followed a conservative budget philosophy in the development of the FY24 budget to insulate against any foreseeable declines. This philosophy uses cautious revenue projections and keeps expenses at an ongoing sustainable level. The fiscal year 24 total budget is $278.6 million, which represents an overall decrease of $15.6 million. The decrease is being driven by one-time expenditures occurring in the previous year. These expenditures include the completion of various capital projects and the use of one-time American Rescue Plan Act funds. As any prudent government, we continue to keep our ongoing operational expenses in check. Excluding one-time purchases, the overall operating budget is increasing 2.8%, which is trending below inflation. These efforts allow the county to continue to provide the services its residents and visitors come to expect while not passing on to the taxpayers the additional costs of general operations. The county receives the bulk of its revenue each year from both property taxes and realty transfer tax, referred to as RTT, with RTT being the largest revenue source. In recent years, RTT has grown to account for almost 40% of our revenue. In the past, it accounted for under 25%. Relying on RTT collections for operations presents a risk due to the volatile nature of this funding. This year, the county is taking steps to reduce its reliance on RTT, and it accounts for 35% of the FY24 revenue. However, as we look to the future, this is a concern the county will need to address. And although RTT is our single greatest source of revenue, it is limited to some of the county's most critical services, including our paramedics, fire and ambulance companies, police, 911 dispatchers, economic development, assessment, public works, and open space. Thus, we can keep pace with the population and the demand for our critical services through the use of RTT. However, should RTT drop below anticipated levels, it is likely at some point in the future the county will need to seek additional revenue from the taxpayers. Revenues are only one side of the budget equation. The other side is the expenses that support our government services and county council priorities. Any new project requests were scrutinized to ensure they are necessary, they align with the county's objectives, and address long-term concerns and issues of this council. The priorities of the council that are supported in the budget include sustaining government services without adding a financial burden to our current and future residents, providing adequate services for our growing elderly population, increasing workforce housing opportunities, and fostering an environment that attracts businesses and creates jobs for our highly skilled workforce. The County Council deserves credit for its leadership and continued fiscal responsibility, which have helped build a strong foundation that has allowed this government to continue to live within its means and stay strong during economic uncertainty. In closing, the county's fiscal year 2024 budget recognizes that the economy is trending downward and therefore continues its conservative approach to ensure the fiscal foundation stays strong, where we can weather any financial storm that comes our way, just as we've done in the past. Okay, Mr. President, we're going to move down to the podium and start to go over specifics in our presentation. Okay. So now we're going to get into the specifics of the PowerPoint that we first started with during the workshop that you guys attended several weeks ago, and starting to put the budget together. As always, we like to take a look back at this year's budget and the accomplishments that staff have performed throughout the year. Many of the staff that have joined us today, I want to thank them for taking time to be here with us. We'll highlight some of these milestones in these lists. I would encourage you, and I would encourage the public, to review the list that's going to be provided in this PowerPoint today when it goes up online. These are the organizational goals of the county, and then these are the milestones that were accomplished in this year's budget. They're broken down by our goals, and this one begins with the services that we promote, our public safety. And it's really amazing, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to take a look back in what we have accomplished in just this past budget year. I've highlighted a few here on the slide, and I'll go over some of these. For example, we achieved accreditation through the Commission Accreditation of Ambulance Services, that's our EMS, and out to the EOC we earned reaccreditation as a Center of Excellence in Emergency Fire Dispatch, and as the world's 30th Police Accredited Center of Excellence and 24th Triple Accredited Center of Excellence. Under the goal of services that promote well-being, we assisted more than 320 households with housing repairs. That's up from last year. Launched the Housing Trust Fund to create and preserve affordable housing units, and began the Western Sussex sewer area. Under the goal of promoting prosperity, we closed Excite Sussex loans in the amount of $2.3 million, retaining 43 jobs. Assisted the Franklin Business Park in securing $1 million in site readiness funding, and leased 4.3 acres to the Great Outdoor Cottages, which added 120 jobs here in Sussex. Under the goal of promoting an enriched quality of life, we used discarded materials and donations from the Delaware Division of Libraries, and Sussex Read Aloud to stock little free libraries around the county and distribute over 1,000 books at community events such as Seaford's Read and Feed program, Greenwood's Health Fair, and Ellendale's Community Park. Partnered with the Ocean View Police Department to host a library booth at the Cops and Goblins family event, promoting library services and resources to approximately 1,500 adults, and providing paperback books to 500 children. Under the goal of providing personal and professional services, our mechanics performed 645 preventive maintenance repairs on county-owned vehicles. That's a 7% increase over last year. Created a GIS web map integration with the Planning and Zoning document management system. Recorded a total of 69,271 documents with a turnaround time of averaging 10 minutes or less, which is a 2-minute improvement from last year. And we began the process of digitalizing, indexing, and uploading building permits onto the P&Z on-base system, which is 2 years of permits for this past year. Under the organizational goal of providing services in a fiscally responsible manner, completed 21 existing wastewater use agreements totaling $1.3 million, created the county's first ever very popular annual financial report, earned another GFOA Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting, and our lost time incidents for the county are at a 0.87 per 100 employees. That is below national average, which is 2 cases per 100 employees. So again, great milestones for our county staff and all the hard work that goes into what they do every single day. And we couldn't do this without them, including creating the budget and putting forth this budget today, but also everything they do throughout the year. And now let's get into specifics. I'll ask Ms. Jennings to come forward, and she will jump into PowerPoint. Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of council. We're going to jump right into the numbers. So as Mr. Lawson had mentioned, we are obviously seeing a decline in the economy, specifically the real estate market. And you can see here on the graph a couple of those statistics. So our building permits are down 9% over 2 years. The 2023 projected numbers are 10 months into the fiscal year when I pulled those numbers. So they're pretty accurate where we're going to end at the end of this fiscal year. And you can also see both dwelling permits and residential permits. Residential permits, also including multifamily homes, are seeing almost 30% decline in those numbers since 2021. That's over 1,000 permits a year in those declines. So you'll see that that is going to impact us financially as we move forward through these slides. More statistics. The ones at the top that are purple, those are building-related statistics. So as building permits go down, so will building code inspections. And we are seeing a decline there. It's a 4% decline. Deed documents recorded, you can see there's a substantial decrease there. And a lot of that has to do with, as interest rates rise, people are not refinancing their homes either. So, and that requires a deed recordation. So you can see 2021 was a peak, but you can see how that's gone down again. And that's 4% decrease over the year before. Utility inspections, again, as developments come on, we perform those inspections. That's a decline. Some other statistics, not necessarily related to the housing market. Constable complaints are relatively flat. Register of wills revenue is going up as our population increases, as the value of those estates increase, that will see an increase over time. And then the next statistics are all sewer related. And as we're bringing on more districts, you can see there's increases as we're bringing on more customers. So the overall budget summary, you can see here that overall it's decreasing $15.6 million or 5.3%. A lot of that decrease is related to the American Rescue Plan. As we spend those monies down, they will be no longer there to spend. And our capital projects are timing of when those projects are being completed. So let's go on to the operations side and those increases over there. So the general fund is increasing $4 million. What I do want to say, though, is about 2.8% of that is continual operational expenses. The other $2 million, or the other 2%, is related to one-time purchases. So we are keeping our spending under inflation, which is very important as we see the economy declining. Same thing when you go into the water fund. We are decreasing expenses as much as we can to keep this sustainable. The sewer fund, also to keep that sustainable, that is well below the inflationary rate of 1.4%. Our pension sees an increase as health insurance costs go up and we have more people are added to the pension fund. So our revenue highlights, there are no increases in the tax rate. We are using reserves. The use of reserves are up from last year. There's $10 million in the general fund and $15 million in the capital fund. And I will go into the details of what we are spending those reserves on, but they are one-time purchases. Tax revenue is up due to improvements. It's up $687,000 or 3.9%. Building-related revenues, as we had showed in the chart where we're seeing a decline in those numbers, obviously the revenue also sees a decline. So both building-related revenues and really transfer taxes down $1.3 million. That's a total $2.6 million of decreases in revenue. Where are we going to make up that revenue? And you will see our grant revenue, specifically grants coming from the state of Delaware to help cover the paramedic expenses, is up 1.5. Sheriff revenue, unfortunately, as the economy is showing a decline, our sheriff revenue then does go up. So that's up $200,000. And wills, as I mentioned before, due to population and estate values, is up $200,000. So if you add up all those up numbers, you see how that offsets the two down numbers. I am proposing an increase in Dewey water rates of $15. This is consistent of what we have been doing over the last couple of years. When we get into that detail, again, that has a lot to do with the Rehoboth Beach water contract. A $10 increase in sewer rates to keep it sustainable, increase in connection fees to help with the long-term capital plan, is up. We'll talk about some engineering fee changes. Again, most of that is related to sewer. And there is a decrease or elimination of assessment fees in 7 areas due to debt being paid off or being paid down.
I have a quick question. When we say that we're using reserves, I think that can be misinterpreted. So define reserves.
So it's prior year, it's savings, it's prior year revenues over expenses. They will be, you'll see, there's some accommodations tax, it's restricted funds, so realty transfer tax, accommodation tax, those types of savings.
Primarily transfer tax.
Correct.
So this is, it's not an extraordinary circumstance that we're dipping into reserves suddenly. We've done that. Oh, sorry. Good. Keep forgetting the button. So it's not unusual for us to incorporate transfer tax, on an annual basis. We've done that historically. It's more in the way we define it, because sometimes it sounds like we're balancing the budget with savings, and technically we are, because it's transfer taxes going into reserves and then being used on an ongoing basis. But we're still extraordinarily healthy, and we're not burning our savings, so to speak.
Correct. All these savings are planned savings to use in the future. So what I have done in the last few years is specifically in the budget ordinance says if we collect over $32 million in really transfer tax, any of that excess funds gets moved over to capital to be spent in future capital projects. And
Right.
then we use those funds so it's a long-term planning tool that we have spent that money, or we saved that money in the past to spend in the future.
Right. I just want the public to be clear on the terminology that's in play here.
So the revenue highlights, you can see, as Mr. Lawson mentioned, really transfer tax is the biggest part of our revenue source at 35%. But as he also mentioned, this used to be 40%. So it is a good thing that we are seeing that percentage go down. The other numbers, taxes are pretty similar to the year before. This includes property tax, accommodation tax as well. It's not just property, be clear with that. Charges for services was 18%, so we are seeing a decline there. And again, that's building-related revenues that's impacting that part of the pie chart. All right, let's dig into the building-related revenues and how this is impacting our budget. So if you start back at 2021, these are actual audited numbers, and you look at 2021 to 2022. So we did see a peak during COVID, a lot of improvements being done. We realized the $2.1 million decrease. Now, as we're almost done with 2023, I can pretty much expect we're going to see another $2.5 million decrease. So between those 2 years, we're seeing a $4.6 million decrease in revenue. As we prepared this 2024 budget, my best estimate, still being conservative, is to take 75% of what we did in 22. So I have put in another $1.8 million anticipated decrease in what the actual is. Now, that's different than my budgeted decrease of $1.3 million because I obviously budget less than what we probably will be bringing in, just to be safe. I have that little bit of a buffer there. But looking at this chart, what is concerning is if you look at 2024 and you go backwards, it wasn't that long ago where we were collecting less than that. So we're almost at pre-COVID numbers, 2020 numbers, but prior to that, we did not reach these levels. So where and how far this goes down, we're not so sure, but we're monitoring this very carefully. Same thing with realty transfer tax. I do anticipate a $12 million decrease between what we collected last year versus what we're going to collect this year. I do have less budgeted for realty transfer tax. Like I said, it's a small percentage. It's 35% this year of the expenses. So that is down $1.3 million of what's in the budget for 2023. Again, similar chart that you saw previously. You can see you go backwards. You can see there's a big dip. It did go back to 2010 at $13.1 million. As I mentioned in previous years, I don't think that is our base anymore, because transfers are going to happen and we do have more improvements. It's still, again, something we need to monitor carefully as we move forward. Realty transfer tax can only be spent on certain areas, and as you can see here, most of realty transfer tax is spent on public safety. That's 90% of what's in the budget. Budget for realty is spent on public safety. Then we have economic development, and as we have the big reassessment project continuing, a big percentage of that realty goes to help fund that project. So I wanted to break it out on where are we seeing the increases in the general fund. And obviously personnel is our biggest expense at 51%. So you would think that most of our increase would be in personnel. It's close. Number one is actually grant and aid. About 2.3 million of that 4 million is the increase. But there is some one-time grants in there, so that is not an ongoing cost. And the other part is personnel. When we have merits and a cost of living adjustment in there, that is where it makes up that increase. And everything else is pretty much balances each other out. You can also look at the expenses by function versus type of expense. And what you can see down here, and the legend over on the right is in the same order as the bar charts. So at the bottom, the biggest expense is public safety. And that is the internal public safety cost here. It does not include what's in grant and aid. Grant and aid is about 10.3 million is public safety. So you add those two together, you can see definitely public safety is our biggest expense. So you can see over time which areas have increased. You'll see grant and aid is the largest increase on there. And again, that is related to a one-time grant. What else you can notice in this chart is in 2020 through 22, there's another blue chart bar there. It says other financing uses. And this goes back to what Mr. Riley was mentioning about use of savings. And I had mentioned that we have been putting realty transfer tax aside and moving that to capital for future purchases. And that's what 20, 21, and 22 show, is that use being moved over. And you don't see that in the budget until we realize those gains that you actually put in those savings for future purchases. All right, moving on to staffing and positions. Again, we are very careful of adding new positions. We know what's happening in the economy out there. So the only increases in staffing are related to sewer. We have 1 utility tech and 2 in the environmental services group for 3 positions. We are eliminating 4 positions in the general fund and replacing them with 4 public safety employees to help with the growth in population. So those net each other out in the general fund for a total of, like I said, 3 employees, and that is related specifically to the sewer fund. So here's the time to talk about the use of reserves. And I had said we're spending $10 million in general fund and $15 million in capital projects. On the slide, there's green numbers. Those are specifically realty transfer tax reserves. So yes, the majority of it is realty transfer tax that we had put aside year after year to be used. The other one is the accommodations tax. We save that money, and then once it's requested, then we spend it. So that is also a reserve that just keeps building up. So we have about $2 million in the bank. $1 million has already been earmarked, has not been spent, but it shows to be spent in the future. And you'll notice, again, we're not balancing the budget on reserves for any operational cost. So we could go down this whole list here, and you can see none of this is operation in the general fund or capital fund. Okay, grant and aid, and as I mentioned, this is the largest increase, biggest part of the budget. aside from public safety. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide for public safety, libraries, and open space because I have other slides for that. So to touch up on the other topics, economic development is the same, the Excite Sussex loan, downtown development districts, we're continuing those. Community assistance is 7%. Item to note here is the housing assistance, it says $750,000. It is requested, proposed that we put $450,000 back into the Housing Trust Fund for settlement assistance, and there's also $300,000 for emergency rehab. And then I've already talked about the accommodations tax. This is $3 million, $2 million being reserves, $1 million being what I expect to collect in the next year. And then agriculture and drainage, these are ongoing costs. There is a one-time grant in here for the UD Ag education program for $60,000 for a capital project. Okay, like I said, we'll get into details of the big ones on that slide. So the first one is public safety. And you can see over time, we continue to support public safety, increase the funding for public safety. Our state police contract continues to grow. This would be for 23 supplemental troopers. Local law enforcement has an increase. This would give an extra $5,000 to each local law enforcement agency. Fire and safety sees an increase. We did give them almost $800,000 last year to help with BLS salaries. That number's in there again this year. Plus, we have a $200,000 amount in there for a fire service study. And all this, again, a combination of the building permit fee and realty transfer tax is what pays for public safety. Libraries, same thing here. You can see the trend since 2020. There's been increases year after year. Their increases come specifically right from the library tax on the tax bill. This works out to be about $73,000 from the previous year, and it's, like I said, due to the growth in those assessments, those tax bills going out. How we pay for the $2.9 million, $1.9 million is just the library tax. We have a mobile home placement tax, and then the rest of it's made up with the general property tax. Open space, we are going to continue to fund this at a higher level. There is another $6 million in the capital fund for open space purchases and $1.4 million on the operations side where we do partnerships with farmland preservation or the land trust. So a total of $7.4 million total. On the operational side, the reason it says 2.9 is that we knew this year, and this is that one-time grant I had talked about and referenced why grants have gone up. There is a $1.5 million grant in to help the state of Delaware with a recreational area at the Trap Pond State Park. This is being used with one-time RTT reserves. So the $1.5 million, the new grant, plus the $1.4 million for the open space partnerships is the 2.9 in operations for open space. All right, quickly touch the capital side of the budget. So the pie chart over on the right, you can see the majority of those expenses are our airport and business park being 36%. This is a decline from last year because the public safety building for the paramedic admin training facility is going to be completed by June 30th. So that is out. The ones that I wanted to highlight, though, is in orange. You can see there's land improvements of $981,000. This has to do with the Hopkins Preserve Master Plan, the partnership with the Land Trust that was talked about a few weeks ago. It's a 3-year plan to make that park a public park. Also new is a mobile library. So on the right, I have a picture of our mobile library. It requires a CDL. We're looking into having a smaller unit that we can hire somebody not without a CDL, but still provide a high-level service to the community. And we're estimating that could cost about $400,000. That would be RTT reserves as well. And then I mentioned on the previous slide, this is where you find that $6 million in property acquisition for open space. All right. Sewer. Again, just like the other slides, you can see the increase over time to operate our sewer. We do see substantial increases as we do bring on new customers. New customers require higher costs in operations. You'll see that we've kept this increase minimal to 1.4%, but even with that, we still have to increase rates, and I am doing that, and you can see what I'm showing here is we are continuing to use savings in operations on this side. So where we talked about on general fund, not using savings to balance the budget for operations, we're doing this on sewer, and we can't continue to do this. And there's a...
This is RTT savings?
No,
Right.
no, this is,
Right. We wanna
sewer
stipulate
completely
that.
separate. Yes, no. This is previous sewer fees that were collected. We're using those savings. We have about 17% in reserves. It's a little bit lower than I'd like. I'd like to see that number at 20%. So you can see in 22, the rate was 296. 2023, we increased it to 320. That brought in an extra $1.9 million. I'm asking another 10% increase to bring in another $853,000. And as you can see, that should cover, we're putting in $601,000 in savings. This rate increase should help to cover those use of savings as we're moving forward. Where are their increases? Just like I showed on the general fund, theirs isn't in personnel when it comes to the cost to run a sewer facility. Theirs is in the operation and maintenance contracts that cost to keep this running. Personnel seen a similar increase as in the general fund, but the big increase is contractual services, and specifically that's maintaining our collection lines is where that increase is coming from. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, there are some increases in some engineering fees. Specifically, they're broken out in sewer review fee, water review fee, road review fee. And we took a deep dive to make sure that our fees that we're charging are covering our cost. And recently, we've taken on some more reviews, the review of the phasing plan or the detailed grading plans. So when you add up that staff time and the increases that staff have received, we're not quite breaking even. So we have to adjust these rates to break even on those fees. And the slide, every fee increase I'm requesting has a reason for that increase.
So I just keep clarifying, thinking from the public's point of view, to make sure that everybody understands that the sewer budget is autonomous, separate from the county's general budget, and it has to be self-sustaining, and there's no commingling of funds.
That is correct. We keep them completely separate. You got it. We're going to talk a little bit about water here in a second, but for simplicity purposes, we have these charges together. So the connection fees for both water and sewer requesting to go up. They're related to inflation. We know what our capital projects are in the future. The sewer service fee is going up. We have a 20-year capital plan. We know what that capital plan looks like, what's coming in the future, and what we need to cover those improvements to our treatment facilities. A lot of the increase here is inflation. If you look at construction costs over the last 3 years, they have increased 15% in costs. So you'll notice that percentage of increase is very similar to the cost of inflation that we've seen in the last 3 years. Here are the assessment rates. I did mention that we have 7 districts that are going to decrease or be eliminated, and those are in green. There is 1 new rate, Mallard Creek, that will be coming online, so there's a new rate there. But you'll see we do have some decreases. All right. Water. We have a very small water district in Dewey and in Ellendale. We are trying to keep this sustainable. It's being difficult year after year. We have made some more efficiencies, moved some staff around to try to keep this cost as low as we can, because as you can see here, starting in 2021, we started seeing operational losses, which means we're using savings to keep this sustaining. So 2021, 22, expect it again in 23. 24 is budgeting with the rate increase. We're still going to be using savings to try to balance this budget. We did know this with the city of Rehoboth in 2021. They did increase their rates to us. That was going to increase $300,000. In a big budget like sewer or general fund, you know, we could absorb it a little bit easier, but not in a water fund that, you know, you have 3,000 people. It's substantial. So as I had mentioned back in 2021 when I did this budget, my proposal would be to continue to increase rates $15 a year. So that is my proposal, to keep that. Good note is, if you look on the green chart, if you look at what the proposed rate is at $392 annually total, if you look at what Artesian, Rehoboth, and Lewis, their metered rates are running using an average metered service, this proposed rate is still under their rate. All right, last topic. So the sewer capital, much bigger than the general fund capital. Remember, general fund capital was $19 million. You will see $66 million capital projects here. Most of this is new communities coming on our system, 74% of that. So anywhere from Concord Road down is anything new customers coming in. And a lot of that gets paid by assessment charges specifically to those districts as they come on. Anything above that are any treatment plant upgrades. And again, that's a lot smaller. It's $17.3 million. A lot of that will be paid with connection fees that we've saved up previously. I think that rounds everything out. The public hearing for this, if the budget gets introduced today, it will be June 20th, 2023. If anybody has any comments in the public, we have an email budget@sussexcountyd.gov. Council have any questions for me or Mr. Lawson?
Great presentation.
I'm finished.
I know you are.
Oh,
I was aware of that. I could tell when you fold your papers
yes,
up.
thank you. I'd like to go home now. Can I please be excused?
But as always, thank you and your team that puts this together. I know it's a lot of hard work, a lot of work past the hours in this office. But thank you for all you do and all your staff does.
Thank you.
Any questions of council? Okay, any questions of council? One more time. Yep.
I think it's a great, presentation. I mean, it always reminds me of fixing Thanksgiving dinner. It takes hours and hours and hours. It takes 20 minutes to eat. And you think of the amount of work that goes in this for a half-hour presentation.
Right.
It's a lot of work. Well done.
Thank you.
Amen.
Good work, Gina.
I have the ordinances.
If you have, we'll have to get them introduced for you. Go
All
ahead.
right, first ordinance title is an ordinance establishing the annual operating budget for fiscal year 2024.
And want to introduce that? There you go.
Okay, and then the second one is an ordinance establishing annual service charges, annual assessment rates for collection and transmission and/or treatment, and connection charges for all Sussex County water and sanitary sewer districts.
I'll introduce it.
Okay, Mr. Hudson introduces that. So Mr. Riley introduces first, Mr. Hudson second. You're good?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you'd have to use